So I want to thank you for joining us today at Ventura County SELPA's Pathways to Success Dispute Prevention and Resolution series. This presentation is going to be part of a webinar series that we've been putting on, but I just wanted to let you know it's being recorded. Your videos are off. All that's going to be not on the video. If there's questions at the end, though, we'll stop the recording so we can take those questions as well. So I wanted to just highlight that this series provides essential skills to help you as an IEP facilitator or an IEP team member navigate and resolve conflicts that arise during IEP meetings and can at times strain relationship between families and schools. We recognize that unresolved conflict impact the student's academic success, and our goal is to help you build stronger, more collaborative partnerships. Each session in this series contains ready-to-use tools, techniques, or strategies that can be applied immediately to improve your communication and foster a more collaborative environment that leads to student success. Before we dive into today's focus on difficult conversations, I want to briefly reintroduce our team and share our mission. So my name is Peter Aguirre, and I serve as the program specialist for the Family and School Collaboration team at Ventura County SELPA. Our team is led by our director, Stacy Alvey, though she's unfortunately unable to join us today, but she helped create this content as well. Our team's core belief is that strong partnerships lead to the best outcomes for students. Our vision is simple. It's to build understanding, strengthen relationships, and ultimately achieve student-centered solutions. We are dedicated to fostering those collaborative partnerships between families and schools, ensuring every student has the support they need to succeed. You can learn more about the SELPA's dispute prevention and resolution services by going to our website at vcselpa.org, and you'll see a tree there, and you click on that and it tells more about our alternative dispute resolution support. In addition to serving districts and chartered programs within the Ventura County SELPA, Ventura County SELPA serves as a California Special Education Resource Lead in dispute prevention and resolution. And that's projects known as Pathways to Partnership. And we do this along with our grant partners, the Tehama County SELPA, as well as serving as a technical assistance provider in ADR for the California Department of Education. The dispute prevention and resolution skills you're going to learn today are vital components to the ADR process and represent a significant investment in our students and schools. Implementing these skills in your work, especially within the IEP process, allows us to actively strengthen relationships between families and schools, which is essential for effective IEP implementation. It allows us to build our collaborative capacity to figure out joint problem solving during the IEP team meetings. It helps resolve issues internally and confidentially before they escalate to formal procedures. They minimize the emotional and financial costs associated with due process and conflict. Now, you'll find you are already using some of these communication skills. This training will help you incorporate those existing skills with new strategies to make all IEP meetings more welcoming and productive, and really proactively reducing conflict and strain. So here you can see all the presentations in the series. Today's is number 4 in an 8-part series. You can access registration for each of these sessions through the Ventura County's SELPA's Professional Development Padlet, which you can access by going to the vcselpa.org website. A copy of this presentation and recordings of these presentations will be posted later, but we'll make sure that you get access to it. Okay, so let's now get started with the presentation. So today's topic is going to be planning for difficult conversation, and is a focused session within that Pathways to Partnership series, Pathways to Success series, sorry. And today we'll equip you with the strategies to successfully anticipate, prepare for, and navigate the most challenging parts and discussions of the IEP process. While we often focus on the IEP meetings facilitator role, the truth is that every IEP team member benefits from this and should utilize the planning and communication skills that we'll cover during these training series. Dispute prevention and conflict resolution strategies work best when people have skills that allow them to effectively manage conflict. All right, so let's take a look at how you'll benefit from today's crucial elements of the IEP process today. So as a result of this presentation, you will walk away with practical tools focused on strategic communication preparation. Specifically, by the end of this presentation, you'll understand the negative impact of delaying difficult conversations and why addressing them early is crucial for student success and team dynamics. You will learn effective strategies to prepare yourself for difficult conversations, ensuring you walk into the meeting with confidence and clarity, regardless of your role, be it administrator, teacher, specialist. You will master techniques to identify interests among team members, moving beyond stated position or demands to find the underlying needs that drive them. You will learn strategies for delivering and coaching positive communication, focusing on constructive language that will de-escalate tension and still maintain that collaboration as well. These skills are valuable whether you're facilitating, leading, or even just participating in the IEP meeting. So let's dive into the specific content. So we're all familiar with the technical purpose of the IEP. It's often viewed through a lens of legal compliance and as a mechanism we use to officially outline the offer of FAPE or how a student's program will look. However, we need to constantly remind ourselves that the IEP is far more than just that legal document that describes the student's educational program. It's the crucial place where we determine how that student needs to be supported. And it's comprised of deeply personal decisions which directly impact the future of the student. So for many of the families we work with, and for us as educators, administrators, these meetings are intensely personal. The decisions we make here shape a student's entire educational path, their access to opportunities, and really ultimately their adult life. So when the stakes are high, emotions are naturally going to be elevated. Understanding this fundamental tension, that personal stakes that lead to high emotions, is a starting point for effective conflict prevention. And we'll dive into this concept in more detail shortly, but first, let's keep this perspective in mind as we discuss the difficult conversations that arise throughout the IEP process. Okay, so diving deeper into why the stakes feel so high, but we need to look at the emotional core of the IEP meeting. So you see this slide that shows two perspectives that the facilitator must manage. On one side, we have the staff perspective, which is loaded with professional and emotional commitments. Their inputs are driven by dedication to the student's success and their professional role. Differing professional opinions that sometimes arise among specialists, team members, which includes the families. The reality of resource constraints and organizational limits, and the pressure of implementation and their legal obligation to deliver the services. And then on the other side, you have the parent's perspective. They come to the meeting carrying intense emotional weight, driven by the deepest beliefs and concerns of their child. Their list includes hopes about their child's future, fears about the challenges they may face on the road ahead, sometimes exhaustion from navigating systems and constantly advocating, and then at the core of it all, the fierce protection of their child, which really drives their participation. So the facilitator, though, in that role, when you're functioning just as the facilitator, you're in the middle. And when functioning in the role of the facilitator, you are there to help the two parties navigate these needs collaboratively to reach consensus on what is truly going to be in the best interest of the student. Because of this emotional context and the valid but often differing professional viewpoints, we must reframe how we view conflict. Conflict is not a failure. It is almost always a guaranteed component of the process at some point. And when individuals' values and high stakes are involved, our goal is to not eliminate conflict, but to plan for it and manage it constructively. So the IEP is just one snapshot in time where the team gathers. Conflict, however, can arise during the meeting or in the valuable work that takes place in the time in between those official meetings. When tough topics arise, our natural inclination is to avoid discomfort and just sweep it under the rug, hoping that it will resolve itself. Unfortunately, when participants delay addressing a tough topic, the conflict is not resolved. It's simply postponed and begins to accumulate what's known as conflict debt. So this concept of conflict debt is borrowed from organizational psychology. See, conflict debt is the sum of all undiscussed and unresolved issues or conflicts that a team or an organization carries. And just like financial debt, conflict debt is incurred when you avoid a necessary payment. In this case, avoid having a difficult discussion when disagreements or debate happens. By avoiding that upfront discomfort of conflict engagement or management, teams and individuals effectively charge the issue to their conflict account, which then accrues interest. The interest on conflict debt is paid with eroded trust, sometimes increased cynicism, and really eventual escalation. And this brings us to one of the primary goals of a facilitator when there is conflict or difficult conversation. And that's to help the group with productive engagement with the conflict. In the role of a facilitator or even a team leader, your task is to shift the team's focus away from conflict avoidance or disregard and instead shift it to early productive engagement. You must treat those difficult moments as opportunities for honest conversation, not problems to be sidestepped. By engaging early, we prevent the loss of trust and really the inevitable escalation of issues. And as I mentioned earlier, go to the next one. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, the IEP meeting itself is just one snapshot in time where the team gathers. Conflict can exist through the ongoing communication and collaboration of the team that supports the student in between those times. To manage this effectively, we need a strategy that addresses conflict productively across time, before, during, and after the IEP meeting. Before the meeting, this involves proactive communication with clarity and mutual understanding. During the meeting, it requires skillful navigation of high emotions and disagreement. And after the meeting, focuses on supportive follow-up and addressing and availability to address unresolved conflict. In the role of the facilitator, we must remember a successful meeting is everyone's responsibility. It's a shared responsibility. It's not solely on the facilitator's job or shoulders. So we will now walk through each of these three phases, briefly talking about the objectives within each. After we've reviewed all those three phases, we'll introduce specific actionable strategies that you can apply across all these different times. So as we move to the before phase, the goal is going to be really simple: pre-solving and preparation. We want to have the difficult conversations that can be had prior to the main IEP meeting. This will ensure that when the team finally sits down together at the IEP meeting, the focus will entirely be on the student's needs and the content that will go into that IEP. It is critical to remember that you cannot have all conversations before the meeting, especially those that are required to be decided by the entire team during the actual IEP meeting itself. Our pre-work, though, or that discussion, is designed to separate the solvable, like relationship or maybe even logistical issues from those core content issues addressed in the IEP meeting. The conversations you conduct before the IEP should involve key decision makers and really only the parties involved in those issues. This usually does not require many people, and this is important because if you include all team members, the discussion risks becoming the IEP meeting itself. So these conversations can be supported by a facilitator who can provide structure and help create a safe space. Now remember, the facilitator can be one of the IEP team members. They simply need to have the skills of a facilitator to support the conversation through techniques that we'll introduce later in our webinar series. But for example, some of those could be the use of agendas, norms, or even process tools. These meetings before the IEP are best utilized for specific types of issues. So relationship issues. So this is essential for front-loading communication and trust. If there's like a historical mistrust or maybe prior communication style clashes or lingering interpersonal conflict, it can be addressed separately before the IEP and whenever possible. Items unrelated to the IEP content, right? So this could include logistic disagreements like scheduling, a discipline concern that can be done through a pre-discussion, or general conflict between staff members. So with that point, it's not just limited to facilitation between families and schools, but can also include issues between staff. Of course, though, if issues for staff is the point of the discussion, it will require individuals and roles that are appropriate to handle those staff conflicts. It can be also an opportunity to have clarification and shared understanding before the meeting. So use this time to ensure that the team has that understanding of maybe assessment data where possible, relevant events that happened, or maybe even an opportunity to discuss the purpose of the upcoming IEP meeting before everyone walks into that meet. This is also a good time to seek clarity on concerns that will be addressed during the meeting. Get this information ahead of time, and it will allow the school staff an opportunity to gather any requested information. And this information can be reviewed by the IEP meeting, during the IEP meeting, or possibly ahead of the meet when appropriate. So your goal here is to protect the IEP meeting time for those complex content-specific decisions that legally must be made by the team. By initiating these separate discussions, you resolve the noise or maybe the logistical disagreements outside of those core IEP content, allowing the main meeting to be as productive and as focused as possible. Okay, so the during phase requires real-time management to skillfully address conflict, if and when it manifests at the IEP table. It should be noted that most of these skills that we talk about here can also be seen in all the various discussions before, during, and after the IEP. So during the meeting, though, address conflict openly. So don't sweep tension aside. Guide the team to address conflicts directly to prevent issues from festering into what we talked about earlier, conflict debt. Immediately apply those active listening skills that we talked in our previous webinar series, like restating, paraphrasing, and the use of open-ended questions, like asking if there's a specific request, how would that look for the student in the classroom? And that really helps to explore the underlying reasons for those concerns or those requests. You can instill hope and develop solutions. So foster a safe environment for the group to work to develop solutions, and remind the team of that shared purpose the student needs, which will help instill that hope and guide that collaboration. And then identify follow-up items. Use time wisely. Have a process to identify items that maybe need follow-up afterwards, such as scheduling a post-conversation or assigning a specific task. The key to success is embracing conflict as the opportunity for deeper understanding and while supporting the team in their development of a collaborative solution. As mentioned earlier, we will review specific communication strategies to support the team during these moments. Okay, so we're getting there. We're going to get to those strategies in just a second, but we just want to talk about ways in which we can hold difficult conversations after the meeting. So this final piece of the cycle is critical because it determines whether the conflict debt is going to be truly paid off or starting to be paid off, and if interest starts to accrue again. So when conflict arises during a meeting, regardless of whether a resolution was reached, there's often lingering emotional fallout. So depending on your role and the role you play in the team, in addition to the facilitator, you must be prepared to conduct a supportive follow-up with those individuals. So checking in to ensure perspectives are understood and to address any lingering hurt or frustration. So this is essential for repairing and maintaining the relationship. This does not necessarily need to be just for the facilitator to do, but can be done by other team members if they're willing to and it seems it would be appropriate. Be available to hold further conversations. So don't assume that the conflict is fully resolved just because the meeting is finished. You must be available to hold those further conversations. Might be another IEP meeting, but either as a group or in small group, or it could be something outside the IEP because of content that's not related to the IEP. Again, the intent is for clarity or follow-up. It's not supposed to be anything that undermines or tries to have added on to the IEP meeting. And additionally, the after phase of one meeting really logically becomes the before phase for the next. So use this time proactively to plan for future conversations, especially concerning any items that were postponed or unresolved. Supportive follow-up now becomes proactive communication, right, for the next step in the team support of the student. By skillfully managing this after phase, you ensure that the partnership remains strong and that the foundation for successful ongoing collaboration is set. And it really helps to alleviate some of that conflict debt. Okay, so we have just walked through the before, during, and after phase of conflict management. Those give us a structure for conflict, addressing conflict. But now we want to shift the focus to the skill set, the crucial how of productive conflict engagement. This starts really with our own state of mind. So consider this quote. conflict is less about what you say than how you prepare your own internal emotional state. Your composure is your best argument. So this is going to bring us to the self-regulation in difficult conversations. And before we can effectively support others, we must first learn to manage ourselves. So maintaining composure in a conflict is difficult due to intense internal pressure we can place on ourselves. And really, this pressure is often defined by two key fears that we have. One is that it's the fear of escalation and making the problem worse, or possibly even losing control of the situation. And two, a fear of being targeted, that as we engage conflict, we all of a sudden become the focus of that conflict. So without self-regulation, this pressure leads to defensive reactions that we may unintentionally do, which can escalate the conflict. So self-regulation is required to respond thoughtfully instead of just having a reaction. So before we learn to regulate ourselves, we must first learn to recognize the signs that conflict has emotionally activated us. So when conflict arises, our body and behavior react instantly. And as a facilitator, you must learn to recognize these signs in yourself as they signal that really your composure is at risk. So there are the immediate internal bodily responses that indicate you're moving towards a fight or flight state, which could be increased heart rate, maybe feeling flushed, shallow or rapid breathing, muscle tension, your shoulders getting locked up, your neck, jaw, a sudden feeling of heat, tunnel vision, loss of focus. So when you notice these physical changes, that's your immediate cue to pause. And then we have our behavioral indicators too. These are the ways, not just internally, but you can reflect on your external behaviors that you might be losing your composure. So that could look like rushing the conversation or repeatedly interrupting others to speed things up. Maybe you start to focus or get lost in note-taking or rely solely on the agenda, avoiding eye contact or emotional connection, or just trying to check in with others. Feeling an overwhelming pressure that the entire success of the meeting is solely on your shoulders. And this feeling of excessive responsibility sometimes leads to that over control and drift from your neutral role as the facilitator. So by recognizing these physical and behavioral indicators, you can start to do some strategies that will help you self-regulate and really be self-care for yourself and help you return to a composed state. So let's take a look at some of these self-care strategies. The first is the 3-second pause. And this is really your immediate cognitive intervention to regain control. So when you feel those physical activations, right, you're gonna, like heart racing, the tension building, maybe you're starting to speak really rapidly. The goal is to slow down your speech and think, and then to avoid rapid speech or rushing, right? The essential action is really a brief internal moment of silence. You can achieve this by subtly taking a slow, now inconspicuous breath. Obviously, if you go, it's going to look like maybe you're frustrated. So do it inconspicuously, but you're just giving a space between your words and slowing things down. And it interrupts that fight or flight stress cycle. I mean, we hear about this time and time again, partly because it's very effective. If we are constantly moving fast, we rile ourselves up. Grounding. Here's another one that we could do. It's a quick, like, internal anchor. So this is when we're having racing thoughts. So grounding should be done relatively quickly. But what you're going to do is notice sensations or the physical space. You're literally just going to be making observations, like where you're sitting, how your feet are placed on the floor. You do it briefly, but it's enough to help you not think so far ahead in advance that you're not focusing on the here and now. It helps you slow down the process too. And it'll really, because you can't have two things being thought of at the same time. When you do that, it slows down everything. And then it helps you really anchor yourself. And now you can become an effective leader of the discussion or help guide the discussion. And then there's self-talk, and that's using those like anchoring statements. So this strategy really directly addressed that internal pressure or maybe the fears that you're starting to say to yourself. So it's really just repeating a strategic statement to yourself. Powerful example is just a reminder that you're here to support the group, and the success of the meeting does not solely rest on your shoulders. Excuse me, I can't talk today. So this really helps you in highlighting your neutral role to yourself, and it reduces self-imposed stress, allowing you to serve the process without feeling personally responsible for the outcome. And even if you're playing two roles, like an IEP team member and a facilitator, really, we know that this is an IEP team decision. So you're really not the only person there that's supposed to help support. You're there as part of the team, but it doesn't solely rest on your shoulders. So by utilizing these three techniques, pausing, grounding, and self-talk, you can take care of that internal state and ensure that you have that composure, which can help you throughout the difficult conversations. Okay, so we've talked about managing our internal state. Now we want to move to skills that change the nature of the conversation itself. So difficult conversations and conflict often stall because of disagreement over a specific demand, right? That's where the conflict comes. We're not on the same page. This skill is the ability to identify the interest behind the stated position. I'm going to go into that in just a second. And it's essential when there's a lack of clarity on the why behind a request. So as we go over positions and interest, I want you to think of it as an iceberg. I know we use icebergs a lot, but this is a great way to explain this concept. Positions are the tip of the iceberg, what you see that's clear as day above the water, right? They are the demand. And typically, they're declarative, they're fixed, and they represent a single solution or requirement. They really are what the people say they want. So when conflict flares up, it's usually because two opposing positions are stuck. Now, interests are the massive hidden part of the iceberg, or the hidden part of that want, right? Or that need. I'm sorry, that position. They are the why behind the demand, the underlying need, the core value, and again, the why that motivates that position. And those are really open to many solutions. So to successfully support the conversation and unlock new solutions, you must help the team articulate these underlying needs, their underlying needs. These interests need to be identified for all parties involved in the discussion, or on all the positions, right? And typically, an interest is a one-word statement of a value or need. So that could be something like safety, inclusion, competence, fairness, and they're always positively worded. So they focus on maybe something like progress rather than avoiding failure, right? So as the facilitator or functioning as a team member, your objective is to use your communication skills like open-ended questions, as we discussed, to support the team's exploration and uncover and identify those core interests beneath the stated positions. You're directing the process so that the team can explore new content solutions that satisfy those underlying needs. So we just established that the core skill is the ability to uncover and identify the interest behind the position. So this is how you open up the possibilities for the team. So let's look at concrete examples of this shift. So here's an example. So remember, the positions are the specific fixed solutions or demand a party states they want. So it could be, I want my child to have a one-to-one aid. That's very declarative, and really there only allows for one outcome. If the demand's not met, the discussion stops. Now the interests, right, on the other hand, is the underlying need that the party wants addressed, the why. So if we then discover, you know what, I want the one-to-one aid because I'm concerned about my child's safety. There we go. That's the interest. The interest here is safety. It's positively worded, and it's a need that's open to more solutions. So instead of saying, sure, the one-to-one aid is one solution to it, but when we focus on safety, it opens up possibilities about what can be discussed to ensure safety for that student. So on this slide, we provided some examples of interest words that we might discover or even hear when people are describing what a particular demand might be, and that hidden interest might be behind a particular demand. So you see a list of them. It's pretty, there's some that you could find and add to that. Maybe change the word slightly, but keep in mind it always needs to be positively worded and typically a single word. So just look at those, because we see that these are the underlying needs that happen in any position that's stated. And like I was saying, you can sometimes hear these be said out loud. They might use these words. And then you can latch on and say, that's the interest. All right, if you go to the next slide, that'd be great. All right. So we know the concept of interest and how important it is to discover them. So how do you do that? So we must really figure out how we can help through dialogue to help that group explore, listen, and build a shared understanding of those interests. So your job is to create the conversational space where the team can explore the root causes of those demands. So you do this by leveraging those open-ended questions that we've talked about, and they serve two specific functions. One is to explore the value. So these questions are to shift the focus from the solution, that specific position, to the core value or motivation, the interest. So you just help elicit that why by saying something about what about X is important to you. So what about the one-to-one is important to you? It's getting it out in the open. How do you see this supporting your student, right? These questions are they also can be done through open-ended questions for clarification. So these questions are necessary when language is vague, emotionally charged, or even contains jargon that we're unclear of. So this unclear language often hides that true interest. So clarification begins by making sure that everyone has the opportunity to fully explain themselves. So a statement like, can you tell us what you mean by safe? So they might even give the interest word, but we're not very clear on what they mean by that. You can ask for further clarification. And by consistently using questions, open-ended questions that explore values and clarify meaning, you are directing the process towards a shared interest or to identify interests and new solutions. So these keep the conversation constructive and support the team even when there's impasse. So we're going to take just a few minutes. This is a webinar, so I'm just going to pause. These are going to be exercises you just think to yourself. So we wanted to provide an opportunity to apply the skill using a vignette. So I'm going to read this vignette, and we're going to try to identify the interests behind the two parties. Right? So there is a conflict between a school and parents regarding speech services for a third grader, Andrew. Andrew's parents want individual pull-out services. The school thinks a push-in group service will be more beneficial so that the teacher and the para can get the tools on how to support Andrew through the week. The parents disagree and are insistent on individual speech services. The team is currently unavailable to agree on the appropriate service delivery model for Andrew's IEP. Okay, so we're going to look at what the interests are for both parties, starting with the parent. So we can clearly identify the position, right? That's loud as day, clear as day, and that's they need individual speech. So Andrew needs individual speech services. But what could be the interest here? From this vignette alone, we can only take guesses, and we really actually won't know until we ask key questions. And often that's what you hear first is the position. So we can open with a statement that validates their position while asking for the why. So an example of that could be something like, I can hear you would like individual speech services because you don't think he's making enough progress. Can you help the group understand how individual services would help achieve that progress? So, right, we ask that question. Now the parent says, well, I think individual speech services will allow him more targeted support. And I know in the past that one-to-one attention really helped him with the progress. I also don't know if the group sessions will make his disability more apparent to the other kids. I just don't want him to be seen as different. Right? So now all of a sudden the parents opened up, is starting to reveal their interest. So I'm going to pause for like 5 seconds. Just what popped into your mind as potential interests that the parent has? I'll go over those in just a second. And in fact, I have Tylena controlling the slides, our administrative assistant on our team. Tylena, could you go back maybe 2 slides so we could look at the interest words? So you can take a look at those, getting some ideas. All right, I'm going to move us back. Can you go back to the vignette? Thank you very much. Okay, so you might have immediately identified progress, especially because the words were used. You heard progress. But you can also maybe think that there might be some privacy concerns, or perhaps there's this acceptance or belonging that the parent is really having as a true interest. So those are the true needs that they have. And you can see that that could open up to new possibilities, right? So now let's look at the school staff, because in any disagreement, there's going to be multiple interests. So looking at the school staff, their position is, again, very clear. They favor a group service push and model. That's the position. So we can ask a similar question, open-ended question to uncover their interest. So from your perspective, can you please share how push and group services would be beneficial for Andrew? And then that school staff may reply, well, we've noticed that Andrew can perform well in one-to-one settings with the speech pathologist. Yeah, we see that. But our biggest concern is how he's using the skills taught through speech with his peers. Our goal is to see how he can make that progress in the classroom. That we will not only help him with his peer interactions, but allow him an opportunity to engage with peers. And ultimately, he can interact with his peers independently. So again, we're going to pause for 5 seconds. Could you go back 2 slides, Tylena? Thank you. So based off the staff reply, what could be the interest? Okay, we can go back to the slide, the vignette. So from that reply, I mean, again, you could see that maybe the interest is progress. And that's great because there's a shared interest there, right? But there could also be that piece of belonging and inclusion. But then there's another piece, which might be autonomy or independence. That's the underlying interest for the school team. So you see, with open-ended questions, we're looking for those interest words. We can start to see the underlying interest needs for all parties. And that allows the group to remain focused on these shared needs, moving towards potentially new or not even thought of solutions that were not initially considered. Okay, so what do? You got the interest. They're out there in the open. Once you've uncovered the interest using those open-ended questions, the next critical step is to reframe those interests or the statements for the whole group. And this process takes the underlying need, names it, and puts it out there in the open, making it constructive. The most effective reframes follow a 3-part structure to ensure that neutrality and focus is there. So the first thing is you remove the bad guy. So focus on the issue, not the person. Avoid phrases that assign blame, like, because you felt ignored by the district, right? Or because you felt that person personally attacked you or whatever, right? You're removing the bad guy and making it you're talking about the issue. Then you identify the interest. So explicitly name that single word, positively worded need, right? And then you start with a reframe statement. So you use clear language that I have here. So here are some of the positively worded reframe statements for interest. It's as simple as, hey, safety is important to you. Or it might look like what is important to you is safety. You could even say in the future, you would like to make sure that whatever is happening has safety at its center. You're getting it out, and not only doing that, but you're also checking in on your understanding. So by attempting that reframe, you're showing that you were listening and that you're trying to understand that core need. And then, hey, worst case, right? You get it wrong. Let's say you say autonomy when the participant meant competence, right? They will likely correct you with the correct interest. And that's not a failure, right? That's actually exactly what you wanted to do. You wanted to get that interest out in the open, and that's the goal of you putting it out there. The reframe acts as a crucial process of conflict management, ensuring that the entire team focuses on the correct underlying need. Okay, so on this one, we have the interest. What can we do with them, right? This one is a technique when we have to navigate difficult conversations by pivoting from conflict to those collaborative moments. And it's an extension, really, on how interest can be used. So remember, brainstorming may not be appropriate in all situations, right? However, when it is appropriate, like when you're at an impasse and ideas are just there's a space to create new ideas. You may want to use this approach. So the key to unlocking solutions is really to frame the brainstorming question around the positive interest identified, right? So focus on a single interest, right? Especially if it's shared. So we know that safety is important to everyone here. So let's brainstorm. What supports can we put in place to help maintain that safety, right? That's what you could say as the facilitator. Maybe there's two interests, multiple interests. I hear two items that are really important for the group, right? Independence and progress. So we're taking two interests in there. Can we share some ideas on how we might be able to develop supports that develop independence while maintaining that progress? So this approach allows the group to remain focused again on the need and not on the positions, because that's where we get stuck. It looks for that shared interest. Okay, so we've talked a lot about interests, which are critical for navigating difficult conversations, because it does move away from positions, locked in single solution ideas, and moves to more possibilities. But we also wanted to talk about the positive no, because in some circumstances, there might be a limit or a item that has to not be delivered, can't be delivered, a solution that can't be delivered following a request. And the goal is to hold that boundary while preserving the relationship and that shared interest. Okay, so I do want to remind you that the facilitator's primary role is to support the group in navigating a potential denial. But they're typically, when you're functioning the facilitator role, you're typically not delivering that content-based no. In fact, if it's content-based, you're not going to deliver the no. If it's something about the process, you may, but really, you're not the one saying no's typically. But you might be in a role where you're playing to the facilitator and maybe the LEA rep. So to set up for a positive no, we always want to explore the request further to understand, again, that true interest before a definitive denial. So rushing to no can actually build that conflict debt. Feels like you're unheard, not even considered, right? So if you must deliver the no in a dual role, such as administrator, you must first label when you step out of your facilitator role and into your IEP team member role. We talked about this early on in the webinar series. That just looks like something as simple as I'm taking off my hat as the facilitator and I'm stepping into my role as the LEA rep, or I'm stepping into my role as the case manager. So before any no is delivered, use this internal sequence to ensure your composure and constructive dialogue. So acknowledge and pause, internally label your feeling. So sometimes when you're saying no, you could feel frustrated. So I feel frustrated or angry or blamed or attacked, right? Or even defensive, right? You're saying this internally. Don't say this out loud. Find a truth and validate. So search for one piece, one small truth that's in there. It could be something as simple as, wow, they care just as much about this student as I do, right? And then acknowledge their perspective. I hear what you're saying, or something along the lines of, based off what you shared, I could see why that's so important for you, right? Then ensure clarity. This is going to be huge. Before setting the limit or saying the no, the positive no, respond with genuine curiosity to really wring it dry, the request dry. Get all the information out. So again, open-ended questions. Help me understand what you mean by this, the one-to-one. Help me how to understand how that would help him. Tell me more about. You're exploring it fully. See, these steps, they prepare you to manage your internal state so that you can move to the next step, which is going to be the delivery of the positive no. So again, it is vital to remember that within the facilitator role, that you're not the one delivering the no, you're maintaining a neutral position. However, individuals serving in the IEP team member might be the one to deliver it. So the facilitator's job, though, is to ensure that if it's going to be a no, it's handled constructively. So the facilitator has an opportunity, if the facilitator has an opportunity to review how to say a no with staff when there's an anticipated request that clearly cannot be delivered, you're going to want to help coach them to that. So emphasize to the team first that they must be open-minded. So don't be quick to just say no, because there might also be more information that can be gained. And they also need to allow the individual that's making the request the full opportunity to explain that, right? And The denial or the no should only be delivered after the team uncovered the underlying interest. So if the team member delivering the denial should integrate like the positive no once this is clear, it can be outlined as we see here in the slide, right? So they need to first acknowledge their feelings, like we talked about early, like this is an internal self-regulation question, like I can't grant that request, right? I don't have to respond, but I don't have to respond with defensiveness. Take a pause because we don't want to rush into it. In fact, that pause not only calms you down, but it also gives this perception, which is probably true too, that you're being thoughtful, that you're really considering the request. And then start with that affirmation or validation, acknowledgement or validation. So I hear what you're saying is this. And based off what you shared, I can hear why this one particular thing is going to be important to you because safety is important to you, right? And then you're going to respond with a no, which we're going to jump into the next slide to go over the structure of that no. It's a 3-part constructed response. So this details the delivery of that denial. So the response must be delivered after the internal preparation steps are done that we just talked about. And you're going to acknowledge the request. So validate the relationship and the underlying interest. So I appreciate you bringing up Andrew's need for safety, right? But you're going to have to clearly state the boundary. So that's the non-negotiable limit, stated objectively, focusing on the constraint, right? Why? Very briefly on the why, right? We're not able to provide that specific level of one-to-one supervision in the general education classroom, right? Now, here's where it's really, really important. The no is followed with a yes, meaning a alternative. So it's got to be a constructive alternative solution. This redirects the conversation away from the rejected demand and back toward collaboration on shared interest. If you're going to deliver a no, what can you offer, right? So in the example we're providing, you could say something about like, however, we can propose a tiered support, like where really the embedded paraeducator in the classroom can help to implement that behavior plan during the transition to the bus. Because I'm hearing that your concern about safety is during that transition to the bus. So by using that structured communication, the team member avoids defensiveness and ensures the denial is heard as a commitment to the person's need and not a rejection of the person themselves. And as the facilitator, if you are able to coach the group on that no, that potential no, really highlight what alternatives do you suggest, right? This is before the no is delivered. And again, I'm saying that only as possibilities, not like the team's coming in deciding ahead of time that no is going to happen for sure. They have to still remain open-minded because they might discover new information during the meeting. Okay. So you can go on to the next slide. Okay, so we are actually finishing up this presentation on navigating difficult conversations, preparing ourselves for difficult conversation. So let's summarize the key actions and strategies you can take away from this training to manage these moments effectively. So today you learned about the negative impact of delaying difficult conversation, which can build conflict debt and erode trust. We learned effective strategies to prepare yourself for difficult conversations by following the structure of before, during, and after the meeting, and by using self-regulation techniques like pausing, grounding, and positive self-talk. And then techniques to identify interests among team members, allowing you to move beyond rigid positions and into those collaborative problem solvings through the use of interests. And lastly, we discussed delivering or coaching a positive no, ensuring that boundaries are maintained professionally while preserving that essential relationship that has to be kept. So mastering these skills will help you navigate those difficult conversations and support your team in their navigation of those difficult conversations as well. So, we have a link here to take a brief survey. I'm talking I think it's like 3 questions, multiple choice. We wanted to make it super easy. Please scan the QR code, give us some feedback because that feedback's going to be used for our next session in our webinar series to make this meaningful for you, right? So we appreciate with all the demands on your busy schedule, especially this time of year in between breaks, you chose to be here with us. And we're going to be releasing these trainings shortly on YouTube. So if you missed past sessions, you can catch up once we upload them onto the VCOE's YouTube page. We'll send out a message though to everyone when those are posted and when the presentation links, like the handouts, are going to be provided as well. So please note, we have our next webinar series, getting tongue-tied today, webinar series on February 5th at 8 a.m. We are skipping January because it's always such a busy month. So we're going to skip next month, but be here again on the 5th to go over our next webinar series, which is going to continue this facilitated IEP and alternative dispute prevention and resolution speaking series.